Greetings Exiles, Lexu here with the ultimate guide for my Lightning Conduit Stormweaver Sorceress Build. I've been playing this build since day 1 of the early access launch of Path of Exile 2 and made multiple videos showing my progression. In this video I'll do a comprehensive build guide covering everything from the beginning setup all the way to tier 16 maps and pinnacle bosses. This build excels at speed farming maps, completely destroying all enemies and breaches with massive area of effect. I've completely solved survivability to be able to tank hordes of enemies, even in T16 maps with +2 to monster level. Obviously my character has had a ton of currency invested into the build. What else would I do with all these juicy drops? Don't worry newbies, I'll also explain how to get started playing the build even if you are low level and have little currency. The Lightning Conduit Sorcerer one-shots map bosses all the way to tier 16. Even a character just starting early tier maps can do it, and I'll break down the skill rotation in this video so you can do the same. I've also been killing pinnacle bosses at the highest difficulty of 4. Check out this 2-shot on the difficulty 4 breach boss. That's 24 million damage in a single hit. From here we can estimate this boss has about 30 million total life. What if I told you the same boss on difficulty 4 can be one-shot? Before getting into the build setup, let's start with the fun stuff and break down the skill rotation for the one-shot Sorc. Almost all bosses have a spawning phase before the fight begins, perfect for setting up one-shots. Lightning Conduit is the boss killer, and it has a massive scaler of 100% more damage per 5% shock effect. Shock is normally difficult to apply on enemies, even with big hits. The most consistent method of applying shock is through the shock ground created by Lightning Warp. Lightning Warp can't be cast on enemies unless their life is in calling range, but it can be cast on ball lightning projectiles at any time. The rotation starts with placing a Sigil of Power from a chiming staff. Sigil of Power grants 14% more damage up to 4 times as you spend mana, so this is cast first to start ramping up the stages. Now comes the shock ground created by casting Ball Lightning and then Lightning Warp. The Strike Twice Ascendancy node for Stormweaver allows enemies to be affected by 2 shocks at the same time, so at least 2 overlapping shock ground effects can be used. Since the boss is still not here, we have the time to ramp up Sigil of Power to stage 4 for 56% more damage by spamming Lightning Warp with no target. Conductivity Curse can also be placed before the boss spawns if supported by Curse Ground. Without Curse Ground support, Conductivity needs to be timed to erupt right as the boss spawns in. The last buff is the biggest from Soul Offering. I have 2 active Skeletal Clerics that can be impaired by Soul Offering. Level 20 Soul Offering grants 39% more damage, which is increased by 60% with Dance Macabre and Ablation, for a total of 62% more damage. The boss is finally here, and I'm already in midair winding up my Lightning Conduit. Let's take a closer look at the debuffs applied to the boss. 2 shock effects are applied with Strike Twice. The shock value starts at 20% for each effect, but is increased to 88% by a massive amount of shock magnitude from passives and jewels. Both shock effects cause the enemy to take 176% increased damage from all sources. Lightning Conduit also deals 3,500% more damage as a bonus on the skill. I'm pretty sure both of these multipliers are applied simultaneously, resulting in a 100 times damage multiplier from shock. The final 2 debuffs work together to reduce the boss's resistance. Conductivity starts reducing the boss's lightning resistance by 38% at level 19, and is increased to 47% when supported by Hiding Curse. Exposure is applied by the shock ground due to lightning exposure supporting Lightning Warp. It starts at a 20% base effect and becomes 40% with Scouring Winds in the Stormweaver Ascendancy. The 40% base exposure is then increased by 80% with strip away support and passive nodes, for a total of 72% exposure. Together, connectivity and lightning exposure lower the boss's resistance by 119% and can cause resistance to become negative. If the first lightning conduit doesn't kill, hit them again. Let's go over the full skill gem setup. You can start leveling a sorceress with Spark or Arc, but I won't cover those builds in this video. Once you find a tier 11 skill gem, you can unlock Ball Lightning to start playing the starter version of the Lightning Conduit Sorceress. Lightning Warp has decent damage and can be spammed on Ball Lightning projectiles to finish the campaign. I'll show all the gem links in order of priority, so start with Magnified Effect and Soul Drain supports. The rest of the supports are added later to increase the damage of Lightning Conduit. Ball Lightning is supported with Scattershot and Unleash to increase projectile count so you can cast more Lightning Warps. Acceleration and Arcane Tempo can eventually be added to Ball Lightning to speed up the gameplay. And finally, Unbreakable to help get the Ball Lightning projectiles out without getting stunned. Use Lightning Conduit to kill bosses once you get a tier 13 skill gem. Make sure you create Shock Ground by casting Lightning Warp, as shown earlier in the skill rotation. Activate Archmage once you have your first tier 14 spirit gem and gain 100 spirit from the campaign. The spirit rewards come from killing the King of the Mist in Act 1, and the Bog Witch in both Normal and Cruel Act 3. Cast on Freeze can be activated once you acquire a Free Dragon's Helm to cause your lightning damage to freeze. Don't worry, Lightning Warp still creates Shock Ground even with Free Dragon's Helm equipped. This skill setup triggers another Lightning Conduit to one-shot everything while you're spamming Lightning Warp. It's also helpful against bosses if you're having trouble landing the manually cast Lightning Conduit. You need an additional 60 spirit to utilize the Cast on Freeze setup, which can be obtained from the Body Armor and Amulet. A Corrupted Implicit on the Free Dragon's Helm can also provide spirit if needed. Clarity is optional if you have an extra 10 spirit. Don't worry about this 30% increased mana regen too much because you'll be able to stack way more from passives and gear. Deactivate Cast on Freeze in Weapon Set 2 if you plan on using the Blink Weapon Swap tech. The 60 spirit can instead be used to activate Blink in Weapon Set 2. This tech allows you to swap weapons to use Blink when needed to speed through maps or escape danger. Connectivity is the curse mainly used to increase damage against bosses. Cursed Ground is eventually supported to allow for precasting before bosses spawn. Sigil of Power is another damage increase against bosses, unlocked by equipping a Chiming Staff in the second weapon set. There are two options for the final buff to increase boss damage. I started off using Mana Tempest supported by Premeditation. This setup ended up only increasing damage by 21% due to diminished returns from stacking a massive amount of extra lightning damage from Archmage. Mana Tempest can also get you killed after draining all your mana. I eventually dropped Mana Tempest in favor of a bigger separate damage multiplier from Soul Offering. Danse Macabre support increases the buff effect if you impale 2 skeletons, so you need to summon 2 Skeletor Clerics. The spirit cost of each Skeletor Cleric goes down to 20 spirits starting at level 17. The gearing requirement is strict to gain another 40 spirit, but the buff increases my damage by a whopping 62%. I have the 200 total spirit required to activate Archmage, Blink, and 2 Skeletor Clerics all at the same time in Weapon Set 2. With 180 total spirit, you can go down to 1 Skeletor Cleric. Soul Offering cast on 1 skeleton still increases my damage by a respectable 50%. Skeletor Cleric only needs to be active in Weapon Set 2 for the boss damage. I've gotten a lot of questions about how I have such high tooltip DPS numbers, so let's explain them before moving on from the skill section. Lightning Conduit hits harder than Lightning Warp, but its tooltip is not including the bonus damage from Shock Effect. The most obvious stat that increases the damage numbers is increased spell damage and increased lightning damage obtained from passives and gear. Skill levels also scale damage exponentially. Going from level 27 to level 28 increases Lightning Conduit's damage by 12%. Another major factor is Archmage, which increases damage based off of maximum mana. My tooltip is just under 6k when I turn Archmage off, and my 4k maximum mana with Archmage increases it to 24k. Let's move on to the passive skills. Use the first two Ascendancy Trials to obtain the Arcane Surge nodes, Constant Gale and Force of Will. Start stacking maximum mana affixes on gear to scale the Arcane Surge effect. Allocate Strike twice with the third Ascendancy Trial to allow for 2 shock applications on enemies. 2 shock ground effects created from Lightning Warp can overlap to apply shock twice. The final Ascendancy points are spent on Scouring Winds for more damage from exposure, applied by Lightning Warp supported by Lightning Exposure. This is the starting passive tree allocation up to level 71. Change the attributes on the small passives to meet your strength and dexterity requirements, and then make the rest intelligence. Prioritize obtaining the damage taken from mana before life nodes and the 9 jewel sockets first. 34% mana before life is obtained from the passive nodes. Jewels with 2% mana before life can be bought for cheap to fill all 9 sockets for another 18% mana before life. The starting setup with 52% mana before life will allow you to survive in early maps. Start stacking life and mana on your gear. Do not allocate Mind over Matter. This key passive is a trap, especially for new players while leveling, as it cuts your mana regen in half. Equip Energy Shield gear and obtain Eldritch Battery once you have enough life to survive. The exposure nodes aren't needed until you support Lightning Warp with Lightning Exposure. Once you finish this tree at level 71, you can allocate your next skill points into the weapon sets. These allow you to allocate skill points twice, and the active nodes switch depending on which weapon you swap to. Weapon set 1 is used while clearing maps and equips a wand and a shield. Select weapon set 1 and start with the block nodes up to Wide Barrier. You can go up to our offensive stance now or come back to it later. The next nodes for weapon set 1 increase area of effect for better map clearing. Obtain Royal, Repulsion, and Reverberation. I've now allocated 15 skill points into weapon set 1, and I can reallocate those same 15 into weapon set 2. Next I'll select weapon set 2, which equips a staff for boss killing. Crit chance and crit damage nodes increase the one-shot potential, like Critical Exploit, for the Jugular, True Strike, Critical Overload, and Sudden Escalation. I've now allocated 15 skill points twice into each weapon set. My current passive tree setup at level 95 improves the pathing in this area to pick up a 10th jewel socket. Raw mana is obtained when you have enough mana regen to sustain the increased cost. The starting areas switch to path through Critical Overload instead of Path of Storms. Mana regen nodes at Open Mind can be switched to only be activated for weapon set 1, and I'm still working towards offensive stance. For weapon set 2, I added Controlling Magic and Deadly Force. All my jewels have been upgraded to 4% damage taken from mana before life affixes, bringing my total to 74%. This makes me incredibly tanky, making 2.3k life feel more like 9k. The damage taken to mana almost never depletes my mana pool due to my 2000 mana recovery per second. This mana recovery stat is increased by mana regen and maximum mana from passives and gear. Obviously these jewels are a bottomless pit for sinking currency into, but I'll let you know how to prioritize the affixes. After upgrading to 4% damage before life, the next important affix is Magnitude of Shock or Magnitude of Ailments. Both of these stats work in the same way to scale the bonus damage on Lightning Conduit. The remaining beneficial affixes include Cast Speed, Area of Effect, Spell Damage, Crit Chance, and Crit Damage. Mana on kill is also helpful. Cast on Freeze triggers rapidly during high density breaches, causing mana to drain quickly. Even one drawer with a 2% mana on kill is enough to make a huge difference in those situations. It's time to check out all the gear. My gear is expensive, but I'll cover the stat priorities so you can find gear for your budget. Starting with the weapons, the first set equips a wand and a shield to be used for clearing maps. You lose a little bit of damage compared to a focus or staff setup, but you gain a ton of survivability. A staff is equipped in the second weapon set for boss killing and focuses on similar stats to the wand. Both increased spell damage and increased lightning damage have the same value in this build. The increased damage stats are usually more valuable than the extra damage stats, because increased damage rolls a higher value, and we already have a lot of extra lightning damage stacked from Archmage. If you must choose an extra damage affix, lightning is obviously preferred over other elements. Levels to lightning spell skills, maximum mana, and cast speed are also important. The wand should have mana regen for mapping, while the staff can have crit damage or crit chance instead for bossing. To go with the wand, equip a hybrid shield with armor and energy shield to make it easier to meet the strength requirement. The most important affix is increased block chance to bring the base block chance to at least 40%. You can gain resistances on the shield if you need help capping them early on, but I recommend capping resistances with your other items. This way you can still have resistances cap when you switch to your second weapon set. Other useful affixes include maximum life, energy shield, strength, intelligence, and stun threshold. The Free Dragon's Helm is required to utilize Cast On Freeze. You can get some different implicits from corruption like Spirit or Area of Effect. This item double corrupted for both AoE and skill effect duration. I had offers of 20 Divine Orbs for this, but I just couldn't part with it. The body armor is where you have the highest energy shield value. At least 700 total energy shield is considered very good. Make sure you consider how much spirit you'll need if you're using all the spirit skills in my setup. This is a good item to pick up resistances. Stun threshold can also be obtained if you already have resistances covered. The gloves and boots are similar, focusing on maximum life, maximum mana, and resistances. A good movement speed roll of 30 or 35% makes clearing maps faster. The amulet provides a huge boost in damage with levels of spell skills, up to +3 if you can afford it. I needed the second spirit affix to reach 200 spirit for my full setup. Maximum mana is also a must-have. Amulets start to get really expensive if you want more beneficial affixes, like mana regen, maximum life, cast speed, and resistances. Don't forget to anoint your amulet to gain frazzled. You can find the recipe by inspecting the node in the passive tree. On rings, prioritize maximum mana and mana regen, since newer catalysts will be used to boost them. A breach ring base allows for more quality to boost mana modifiers by 50%. Maximum life is also highly recommended. Finish capping your resistances, or if you already have enough, cast speed makes combat feel smoother. Ingenuity is an expensive, unique belt, but well worth the currency to boost good rings. Even a 50% increase bonus from rings can be worthwhile depending on your items. I bought this belt with a corrupted implicit for dexterity for the same price as a non-corrupted version to help with dex gem requirements. You can also find corrupted belts of strength, intelligence, or life. Before picking up ingenuity, you can use a rail belt with the usual life, mana, and resistance affixes. Increased rarity should also be considered on all your gear. It works well to increase your currency gained while farming, but you have to sacrifice other combat stats for it. The most effective way to increase rarity without losing too much combat performance is with a Mahu shield socketed with Soul Cores of S Kappa. Some block chance and stats for my other shield are traded for 145% increased rarity, but I've still been able to farm all my maps just fine. The last point I need to address are the questions about the differences with my build and other setups utilizing Mind Over Matter and Energy Shield. Taking Mind Over Matter cuts your mana regen in half, and there's no way to make up for this penalty. All damage dealt to mana means you're going to go out of mana once you take heavy damage, leaving you unable to fight back. Splitting damage between life and mana in my build is much tankier. Because the 2k mana per second keeps my mana full, the 74% damage taken to mana before life is essentially 74% damage reduction. The damage to life is also easily recovered with a life flask. Everlasting Gaze could be used to gain energy shield with Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery. But energy shield is difficult to recharge in combat. You'll end up spending a lot of passive skill points in energy shield nodes to make recharge work. I also lose about a 32% damage increase when replacing my rare amulet, or about 45% damage increase once I upgrade to +3 skill levels. If you learned something new in this video, you owe it to me to click that subscribe button. I'll be releasing more content soon for Path of Exile 2. Until next time, peace out and happy slaying.
Khan favors me.
I'm never against treasure.